Okay, here we are in week 7. I'm looking very corporate today in my Griffith uniform sweater. This week we want to look at how we can plan for effective teaching for students with different achievement and interest levels really. So the first video here, we're going to look at different achievement levels. The most common way of coping with this in schools has been to have streamed classes where we differentiate them and put them in different classes on level based on their achievement, but largely research has shown that this is not effective. So we'll try and look at some other ideas. And here's an overview of what we'll cover. What does achievement mean? How we can develop greater achievement in a range of ways, and then how we can help adjust our teaching and plan for differences. So to start with, we just want to look again a bit philosophically, what's the purpose of mathematics? And you can see a history there. The video, I think it's interesting. Have a look at it, see what you think. But mathematics has grown over time in a whole range of places over the world. It didn't just develop, it wasn't always as it is now. A lot of it developed in ancient parts of the world in different ways. And we've ended up with what we've got now. But it's not to say this was how it always was. And there was a whole range of ideas that had different histories and some caused quite contention. So the idea of zero was quite contentious for a long time, and they had huge debates. And in fact, people were being killed because they were promoting the idea of zero, which was seen as being untheologically sound at the time. Mathematics was often closely associated with theology and philosophy. So all the great philosophers of history were also mathematicians. Anyway, what we've ended up now is based on a counting system of base 10, but that's not the only one. And you wouldn't be surprised to know why we've got a base 10 counting system. Anyway, there's lots of ways of counting and calculating and sharing. And the mathematics we've ended up with, which is now really pretty common across the world, is one way that seems to have been accepted and has been taken as mathematics. But of course, in computers, they don't have a base 10 numbering system, they just have a base 2 numbering system. Anyway, mathematics has been formalised into what it is today, but it doesn't mean it's the only way. And you've got to see it as a group of ideas and concepts which has been developed historically through a range of social contexts. So what does it mean then to have achievement in mathematics? Now, there's a few things that build towards achievement. Of course, it relates to, I guess, what we'd call mathematical ability. By that, the things the kids know and can do, but also their potential to learn some of these sorts of things. And again, mostly their ability relates to what they could do previously. It relates to Bloom's taxonomy levels, so the different levels of thinking, which you would have covered many times previously. It relates to their participation. So some of the kids might have the capacity to really achieve well in maths, but they just don't want to join in for a range of reasons. And at the moment, in most Western countries, this is around number and algebra, measurement, geometry, probability and statistics, which you will recognise now as the content strands in the Australian curriculum, and indeed the content strands in most countries around the world. But importantly, achievement in maths is not a fixed thing. It goes up and down, and it's not even a nice smooth development. So sometimes we think of a student's development in maths or other subjects just being a nice upward slide like that, always getting slightly better each day. But it doesn't really. It goes up like this, and they forget something and they go backwards, and then they'll have a big jump, and then they'll come forward. So just remember, if you measure achievement, for example, one day, it doesn't mean their achievement's the same a week later. It's just a snapshot in time. And that's one of the things about NAPLAN. It tells you a snapshot in time about the children can do, but it doesn't mean they can still do it or they can't do more 2 weeks later. So one of the things is when we measure achievement, we've got to be careful we don't measure it too narrowly. Often, historically at least, we often measure it just through a test. So kids who are quite good at basic algorithms do quite well, and kids who might be more divergent in their thinking or think laterally about things or even good at problem solving and something like that are often seen as not achieving as well, even though they may be stronger in mathematics in other areas. So we can incorporate the big ideas, which includes mathematical thinking, patterning, proportionality, representation and generalization. And you can see this sort of stuff across a range of levels, and I'm just giving a little example there which might seem a bit contrived, but it's a way of trying, if they can see the pattern, it shows a level of mathematical achievement even in different places. So how can you help develop students' achievement? Well, in teaching mathematical knowledge and content and skills and concepts, you need to focus on the 4 phases of learning. And I'll go through these in a bit of detail, but there are 4 phases, and we think kids move through them and adults move through them, but it doesn't mean it's fixed. People can go back and forth between them, and sometimes they might skip it. But they start with acquisition, they gain the idea. And that's the initial part. Then the second part is once you've gained the idea, you become fluent with it. You can do it fairly regularly without too much thought. And then the third part is about maintenance. So how can we get that sustained over time? So yes, we've taught something, they've got the idea, they can become fluent in that idea, they can maintain and still do that thing later on. And then from that, how can we generalize that to other areas in different places? So I'll give you an example. If you're learning to drive a car, the first thing is you need to learn some of the basic things. You need the acquisition of the knowledge and ideas about how to start the car, what the pedals do, and you might learn those things. And then through practice, you will develop fluency. So you can drive the car without having to give too much thought to your feet or those sorts of things, and you can attend to the perceptual field in front of you. So you can watch the road rather than looking down at your feet. Right? So that's why we take learners in cars into car parks, so they can learn without too many other distractions on them. We don't take them straight out onto the road. So once you become fluent, then what it is about developing it so that that knowledge is sustainable. You wouldn't do one driving lesson and then don't do anything for 3 months and then try again. You want to keep getting experience and practice so then you can maintain it and do these things all the time until you become a good driver. And then once you've done that, you might want to generalize that to a different car. So you learn to drive on a Toyota Corolla and now you've got a Hyundai or something, and you can still drive that car because it looks similar. And maybe if you game, you could generalize some of that to driving a manual, but you'd have to learn some new skills as well. So broadly speaking, they're the stages, and that's what we're trying to help students work through as they develop their achievement and their knowledge and competence in mathematics. I don't think that's probably rocket science for you. Now, I'm pretty sure you would have seen lots of times people doing this through basic things. So the teacher helps develop initial acquisition by giving some instruction from the front of the class, then develop some sort of fluency by kids practicing the exercise, has some maintenance because they stick in some later on, and then might generalize it to another part of the curriculum. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the only way of doing it. You can do it through problem solving. So this is like when you involve things in a range of things that might have mathematical things in a whole range of learning areas. And particularly as a primary teacher, you have the access here because you don't just teach them maths, you teach them all sorts of things. Now here's an example from dance. There's a video there you can have a look at. I'm not recommending you necessarily do this one, but I just wanted to try and choose something that was sort of out of left field maybe. Personally, I'm not a big fan of dancing. I'm not a good dancer, you might be surprised to know, but it's an example of how you could develop some mathematics from a context even like dance. And if you're interested, you can follow that up. So how can you see the mathematics in problems tasks? Well, first of all, you as a teacher have to have developed your own mathematical knowledge and skills and disposition so you can see these things. But as you do this, and if you see a task you're going to give to the kids, you've got to recognise three things. First of all, what's the prerequisite knowledge that the students need to know? What do they need to know before they could even start this? So for example, if you're teaching about probability, they'd have to have some understanding of fractions before you started, because probabilities are expressed as fractions amongst other things, and therefore if they didn't understand fractions, then they couldn't start understanding probability. So that might be a prerequisite. The second part is what mathematics is embedded in the task and will be developed as they go along. And then the third part is what mathematics is associated with the task and can be engendered by the task. So as you look at a task or a problem, see if you can identify some of these sorts of things. And here's an example. Students could be asked to do a problem-solving task around space exploration. And they're going to investigate the solar system, perhaps part of their science program as well, and they're going to develop a coherent design for the solar system. The video is there for you to use and look at, which might give you a start. And maybe you'd show the kids the video. So here's a way of looking at it. The task is space exploration. What's the prerequisite number? Well, what's the prerequisite mathematics, sorry? Well, they'd have to understand whole number. And if you've looked at the video before you've come to this, you'd understand that they also need to understand common fractions, addition and subtraction, and have some vocabulary like higher, wider, smaller, etc. like that, some descriptive terms. Through the task they could develop decimal numbers, multiplication, division, location, direction, and some of those measurement terms there, as well as proportion. And then associated with the task, they might develop some mathematical knowledge around shape, measurement conversion, and attribute classification around objects. So have a look at the video and see if that makes sense to you. Now, this is an important task to do as a teacher, because then you would look at those prerequisite things, particularly before you even start. You'd need to make sure the students can do that. And maybe you'd teach some of this stuff, as we talked about previously, just in time. Just before they did it, they could develop these things to help them then move on and understand the new concepts. Now, I've put this in because it still seems to me it's quite common practice to group students in mathematics, and there can be good reasons to do it. But also there can be unintended consequences when we do this. One of the things we know from a lot of research is when we group students by ability or achievement, so-called ability, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it has self-efficacy effects. So when we put students in ability groups, we know that if teachers think students can learn, independent of whether they can or not, the students will achieve well. All right, so if you put kids in the top group, even if one of them's not necessarily a good fit there, they'll all do well. And if you put kids in the bottom group, often they'll experience difficulty in learning, even if they can learn it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So while occasionally it might be useful to group kids by ability, in my opinion, I think it doesn't really work, and I would use it very sparingly. And if this is done, if teacher treatment is consistent over time and students do not actively or resist or to change, then what's likely to happen is the students will develop a self-concept consistent with the group you've put them in, regardless of previous ability or achievement. So if you put them in the dumb group, they'll be dumb, because they know that that's what they're meant to be. Their achievement motivation will follow. Their level of aspiration will also be related, and the level of conduct and behaviour is often synonymous, and then their interactions with the teacher tend to be lower. Conversely, if you put kids in the top group, regardless of whether they're exceptional or not, they develop a self-concept of a high achiever, their achievement motivation is higher, they tend to have a higher level of aspiration, and they behave better, and they have higher level of interaction with the teachers. So it's important really that, in a sense, you have all the kids in the top group, that all kids think and perceive that you believe they can learn. having high expectations is one of the biggest predictors of kids' achievement. Now this is an interesting point for you as a teacher, because what if you've got a kid who you think's really not coping very well? Well, if you think they're not going to cope very well, then they won't. So part of the thing you have to change is your perception of them. Find what they are good at and build on from there. Because unless there's any specific learning difficulties, there's no reason that any student can't achieve in class. I imagine you've had lots of talks before in some of your prac subjects and the things over the years about teacher expectations. It's no more important than in mathematics. And in my opinion, I would avoid ability grouping most of the time because it's counterproductive. There's better ways of doing it which still challenge the kids who might be doing quite well at the moment and which help build all the kids up together. So here's some of the things we know from research. By the end of the first year of school, okay, so 6 years old, they reckon about 40% of students are falling behind their peers at least one aspect of number learning. Now this is the problem, because if they get behind at 6 years old, we're going to spend a lot of time trying to catch up, and invariably we don't catch them up, we just let them fall further and further behind. So whatever level you have kids at, your job is to try and get them all up to speed. Even if they're 1 or 2 years behind, I would make it my mission to get them up to speed by the end of the year. That would be the greatest gift you could give them in their maths learning. But if you're going to be a proactive teacher, which I'm sure you're all aspirational to be, then you need to have a clear idea of what you want the kids to learn. You need to have a clear idea about how you'll know they've learnt it. What are the clear ideas? You'll need to build a commitment and engagement with the task for the students. And you have to have a model that helps them all build understanding and checks on their understanding, and all students can get involved. It's important that there's clear feedback to all students. Remember that achievement levels can change and vary from time to time. So if you base it on a one-off assessment, you could be grossly misinterpreting a kid's learning. So rather than spending too much time evaluating where you think they are upon some learning trajectory, try and find out what they know and can do so you can then build them all on from there. It's a real myth that ability grouping works. Now, the other thing I would do, comment on here briefly, is the withdrawal of students. Sometimes we withdraw students from class to give them a differentiated learning program. And occasionally we get students who are really gifted or really struggling when this is worthwhile for a while. But particularly for students who are struggling, if you're going to withdraw them, the point of withdrawing them is just to give them that catch up in time so they're ready to participate with the rest of their classmates at the same time. If there's a real gap there, or maybe they were away for a few weeks the previous year and they just completely missed something, withdraw them, give them a really intense catch up, but then put them back in with everyone else and make sure they can continue with everyone else. It can only be for short periods of time. If you're withdrawing students for the whole year, then really the next year when they go forward, they're still going to be behind, and there's no point in that. The point is to try and get them up with everyone else. We're not trying to isolate a student or even a small group of students, but prepare them so they can more effectively engage and participate with their regular class in the program that all the kids are doing. And that program, of course, should have differentiated access points and tasks and ways of people engaging with the content so they're all involved. So again, a common practice we see is withdrawing students, and it can be done for a particular purpose for a short period of time, but it can't be a long-term and ongoing practice. So, some final points about mathematical achievement. The first thing is it's not fixed. The second thing is it changes over time, and it can indeed change from day to day. And finally, ability or achievement can only partially be measured. There's lots of parts of kids' achievement that we don't know about because we don't measure it in a formal assessment. But it's equally important, particularly if you think about last week's lectures on numeracy, where we talked about dispositions and inclinations to use stuff. Okay, so I hope I've challenged some of your ideas about mathematical achievement. Again, we're confident that you're going to be great teachers, not just for the bright few kids in the class, but for all the kids in the class. And then as you get this group of students each year under your care as a teacher, you'll ensure that they are all achieving and all up to speed, and you're setting them up for success because you have an innate belief in their capacity to learn and be mathematical. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the second video shortly.